Mike Callahan navigated the intricate world of high-stakes finance with the same meticulous precision he once applied to dismantling complex criminal enterprises during his years as an FBI special agent. Now, as the founder and principal of Callahan Forensic Solutions, a highly sought-after investigative accounting firm, headquartered in the polished steel and glass heart of downtown Denver, his battlefield consisted of labyrinthine spreadsheets, hidden offshore accounts, and the sophisticated lies people told with money. His reputation was built on an unnerving ability to find the truth buried beneath layers of deception, a skill that had made his firm indispensable to corporations facing internal fraud, law firms engaged in bitter litigation, and even government agencies needing specialized expertise. Life was orderly, rational, profitable, a stark contrast to the controlled chaos of his former bureau life, but satisfying in its own way. His personal life seemed to reflect that same carefully constructed order. He shared a spacious, elegantly appointed home in Denver's upscale Cherry Creek neighborhood with his wife, Sophia. With her effortless style and background in high-end event planning, Sophia was the picture of sophisticated charm, a graceful counterpoint to Mike's more reserved intensity. They moved easily within Denver's professional and social circles, the successful forensic accountant and his charismatic wife, a portrait of stability and achievement. Lately, however, Mike had sensed a subtle dissonance beneath the harmonious surface, a growing emotional distance masked by Sophia's increasingly frequent late nights attributed to demanding client events or networking functions, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes during quiet moments, a slight impatience barely concealed. Mike, trained to notice anomalies, had registered these deviations, but had initially cataloged them under marital stress or career pressures, hesitant to dissect his personal life with the same ruthless objectivity he applied professionally. The analytical part of his brain noted the data points. The husband part hoped they were insignificant noise. That hope evaporated completely on a crisp Thursday evening in October. Mike was working late in his office, reviewing the final details of a complex report exposing embezzlement within a major tech firm, when his secure personal phone buzzed. It was Dave Riley, his oldest friend, a partner at a downtown law firm and one of the few people who truly understood both the man Mike was now and the agent he used to be. Dave rarely called this late unless it was important. Mike answered immediately. "Mike? You sitting down?" Dave's voice was tight, strained, lacking its usual easygoing cadence. A knot of apprehension formed in Mike's stomach. He leaned back in his chair, the Denver skyline glittering coldly outside his panoramic window. "I am now. What's wrong, Dave?" There was a heavy sigh on the other end. "Man, I debated calling, but you need to know. It's Sophia." Mike's grip tightened on the phone. "She's here at the Crystal Sphere." Dave named a trendy upscale club downtown known more for its exclusivity than its discretion. "And she's... Mike, she's not alone." "Okay," Mike said slowly, his voice deliberately calm, forcing the practiced control of an interrogator. "Not alone how?" "She's with Evan." Evan Prescott, Sophia's unserious musician ex from college, the one she always dismissed as a youthful mistake. "And they're putting on a show, right in the middle of the damn dance floor. It's basically public sex, Mike. Hands everywhere, making out like teenagers. It's bad." Mike felt a chilling numbness spread through him, overriding the immediate surge of heat. "Publicly?" But Dave wasn't finished. His voice dropped lower, laced with disgust. "And the worst part? Greg and Chloe are here too, watching, laughing, clapping along like it's some kind of performance art. Greg Morrison, owner of a regional logistics company. Chloe Vance, who ran a boutique marketing consultancy. Both were clients of Callahan Forensic Solutions. Both were considered close couple friends. The betrayal, sharp and multi-pronged, hit Mike with physical force. His wife, her ex, and their friends, his clients, cheering them on. "I didn't want to be the one to tell you," Dave continued, his voice rough with discomfort, "but I couldn't let you not know. This is beyond messed up." "Location confirmed?" Mike asked, his voice devoid of emotion now, switching fully into operational mode. "Yeah, main floor near the East Bar. I'm heading out now, didn't want to stick around, but wanted to give you the heads up." "Thanks, Dave. Owe you one." Mike disconnected the call before Dave could reply. He stared blankly at the intricate financial charts on his monitor, the numbers suddenly meaningless. The cold numbness receded, replaced by a glacial fury that settled deep in his bones. He stood up, moving with fluid efficiency, grabbing his jacket and keys. There was no conscious thought, only a primal need to confront, to contain, to reassert control over a situation spiraling into public humiliation. The drive downtown was a blur of red taillights and impatient horns, none of which registered. Mike's mind was a whirlwind of calculations and raw emotion barely held in check. The image Dave painted, Sophia, Evan, Greg, Chloe, played on repeat, each iteration hardening his resolve. This wasn't just infidelity, it was a brazen public declaration of contempt, facilitated and applauded by people he trusted, professionally and personally. He pulled up near the crystal sphere, the pulsating bass vibrating through the car frame. He didn't bother with the valet, leaving his car in a nearby garage and approaching the club on foot, his movements measured, his face an unreadable mask. Inside, the cloying scent of expensive perfume and stale champagne hung in the air, overlaid by the relentless beat of the music. He scanned the dimly lit, crowded room, his eyes quickly adjusting, locating the cluster Dave had described near the east bar. And then he saw them. It was exactly as Dave had said, perhaps worse. Sophia, flushed and laughing, was pressed against Evan, her hands tangled in his messy hairs as it explored the back of her dress with possessive familiarity. They weren't just dancing. They were practically fused, oblivious to the stares and whispers around them. A few feet away stood Greg and Chloe, wide grins splitting their faces, drinks in hand, raising them in a mock toast as Evan dipped Sophia dramatically. Chloe even let out a whoop of encouragement. Something cold and hard settled in Mike's chest. He started moving towards them, cutting through the crowd with an unnerving calm that made people instinctively step aside. He didn't feel the music, didn't see the flashing lights, only the tableau of betrayal before him. He stopped directly in front of them. The proximity, his sudden silent appearance, finally registered. Sophia turned, her eyes widening slightly in momentary shock, quickly followed by a flicker of defiance. Evan tensed, pulling back slightly. Greg and Chloe's laughter died abruptly, their smiles freezing, then faltering. Sophia recovered first, attempting a shaky, dismissive smile. "Mike, what are you—" "Enough!" Mike cut her off, his voice quiet but carrying an edge that sliced through the club's noise. It wasn't loud, but it commanded attention. The immediate area around them grew unnaturally still. "Not a single word, Sophia." His gaze, cold and analytical, shifted to Greg and Chloe. Their faces had paled. "I saw you," he stated, each word precise, devoid of heat but heavy with consequence. Laughing, clapping, like this was entertainment. He took a deliberate step towards them, invading their space. "My wife, your friend's wife, disgracing herself publicly with another man, and you cheered." He paused, letting the accusation hang. "As of this moment, our professional relationship is terminated. Our friendship is over. You are now adversaries. Consider yourselves warned." Greg opened his mouth, perhaps to protest or explain, but visibly thought better of it under Mike's unwavering stare. Chloe looked down, unable to meet his eyes. Mike then turned his attention to Evan, who was attempting to muster some semblance of bravado, squaring his shoulders. Mike sized him up instantly, weak, posturing. "And you," Mike said, his voice dangerously soft. "Enjoy the moment. It won't last." Finally, he looked back at Sophia. The defiance in her eyes was warring with a dawning fear. "Go home, Sophia," he commanded quietly. "Pack your immediate essentials. Be gone before I get back." He held her gaze for a beat longer, ensuring the message was received. "Do not test me on this." Without waiting for a response, without another glance at any of them, Mike Callahan turned on his heel and walked out of the crystal sphere, leaving a pocket of stunned silence in his wake. The cold Denver night air hit him, but it did nothing to cool the icy resolve solidifying within him. The forensic accountant, the ex-FBI agent, was fully engaged. The investigation into the full scope of this betrayal, and the planning for its consequences, had just begun. The drive back from the crystal sphere was navigated on autopilot, Mike's mind a maelstrom of icy rage and rapid-fire analysis. He replayed the scene, Sophia's flushed face, Evan's possessive stance, and, most gallingly, Greg and Chloe's laughing complicity. The betrayal wasn't just intimate, it was communal, a public spectacle endorsed by those he'd considered friends, even clients. By the time he reached the quiet, tree-lined street in Cherry Creek and pulled into his driveway, the emotional shock had been ruthlessly compartmentalized. The house, usually a sanctuary, now felt like violated territory. It was his house, purchased years before Sophia, built with the rewards of his relentless work ethic, first at the bureau and then with his own firm. He wouldn't lose it. Inside, the silence was heavy, confirming Sophia hadn't returned. Good. He needed time to operate. His first call, made before even loosening his tie, was to Arthur Thorne, arguably Denver's most feared divorce attorney. Thorne's reputation preceded him. Brilliant, utterly ruthless, and prohibitively expensive, known for dismantling opponents with surgical precision. Mike relayed the events concisely. The public infidelity at the club, the names of the witnesses including Dave Riley, the complicity of Greg and Chloe, his explicit directive for Sophia to leave, and his non-negotiable objective. A swift divorce protecting 100% of his premarital assets and his business, Callahan Forensic Solutions. Thorne listened intently, his sharp legal mind processing the variables. Public flagrante delicto, corroborated by credible witnesses including opposing counsel's potential future client. Thorne chuckled, a dry reptilian sound. Excellent. Gives us immediate leverage. Adultery simplifies things considerably regarding alimony claims against you, especially given the public nature. He gave immediate instructions. File first thing tomorrow morning, petition for dissolution based on adultery. Will include affidavits from Mr. Riley. Regarding assets, you mentioned the house was premarital. Yes, deed is solely in my name, purchased 5 years before the wedding, Mike confirmed. And the business? Callahan Forensic Solutions is held within an irrevocable trust established prior to marriage. I'm technically a salaried employee, managing director, Mike stated, anticipating Thorne's line of questioning. He had structured his life with the same meticulous care he applied to forensic audits. Superb, Thorne purred. That insulates it almost entirely. Leaves the joint accounts. I advise you secure those funds immediately. Transfer everything into accounts solely under your control. Justify it as preventing dissipation of marital assets by the adulterous party, pending court order. Standard procedure in these circumstances. Document everything. Thorne paused. Consider it done, Mr. Callahan. We will ensure Ms. Callahan receives precisely what the law dictates she deserves after such brazen behavior, which, given these facts, will be next to nothing. Following Thorne's advice, Mike spent the next hour logged into his financial portals. He verified the house deed again. He reviewed the trust documents for his company, confirming their ironclad nature. Then he turned to the joint savings and checking accounts. As he suspected, reviewing the transaction history revealed a pattern of significant withdrawals by Sophia over recent months, likely fueling Evan's lifestyle or her own exit strategy. With methodical precision, Mike initiated wire transfers, moving the entire remaining balance from the joint accounts into his established personal accounts. He took screenshots of the balances before and after, saved digital copies of the transaction confirmations, and drafted a brief factual memo citing Thorne's advice regarding asset preservation, uploading it all to a secure digital file accessible only by him and his attorney. Asset secure. His next call was to Rick Sheridan. Rick had been his team lead on the FBI's hostage rescue team years ago. Unflappable, loyal to the bone, now running a high-end private security and logistics firm in Denver. Rick, it's Mike Callahan. Mikey! Long time. Everything all right? Rick's voice was deep, instantly reassuring. Need a favor, Rick? Personal. Off the books, Mike said, keeping his tone level. Need your crew, the discreet guys, at my place. Tomorrow morning, 900 hours sharp. A beat of silence. Trouble? Rick asked simply. Cleaning house, Mike replied critically. Literally. Understood, Rick said without hesitation. We'll be there. How many hands you need? 4 should cover it. Need efficiency and discretion regarding the handling of certain items. Consider it done. Promptly at 9 the next morning, Rick pulled up in an unmarked van, followed by another carrying 3 solid, capable-looking men who moved with quiet professionalism. Mike met them in the pristine, oversized garage. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. Morning, Mike began, his voice flat, all emotion and carefully expunged. The task is simple. Every item in this house belonging to my soon-to-be ex-wife, Sophia Callahan, needs to be boxed up. Clothes, shoes, makeup, toiletries, books, any decorative items she brought in. Everything. He looked at each man, ensuring he had their full attention. But this isn't a standard move. I want a message sent. He paused, letting the implication hang. Treat the contents like refuse. Before items go into the boxes, especially clothing, I want them marked. He made a subtle but unmistakable grinding motion with his boot heel. Ensure they understand they've overstayed their welcome. Be thorough. Leave nothing unmarked. Rick's eyes narrowed slightly in understanding. Then he gave a single, curt nod. Her wedding dress, Mike added, his voice dropping almost to a whisper, requires special attention. Make sure it's, memorable. Rick gestured to his crew, and they moved into the house with practiced efficiency. The next hour was a symphony of controlled destruction disguised as packing. And drawers were yanked open, closets emptied onto the floor. The sounds echoed through the large house. The scrape of cardboard, the rip of packing tape, and the dull, rhythmic thump and grind of heavy work boots deliberately applied to silks, cashmeres, and linens. Mike watched for a time, standing silently in the doorway of the master bedroom, a cold, grim satisfaction warring with the lingering ache of betrayal as he saw years of shared life treated with methodical contempt. Rick personally oversaw the handling of the wedding dress, a brief, brutal act involving ripped lace, strategically ground in dirt from a potted plant, and finally stuffing it unceremoniously into the bottom of a box filled with soiled shoes. Just as the crew was taping up the last few boxes and hauling them towards the front porch, a car pulled into the driveway. Eleanor, Sophia's mother, emerged, her face etched with worry. Trailing hesitantly behind her, looking profoundly uncomfortable, were Greg and Chloe. Mike met them on the wide stone porch, positioning himself between them and his front door. The boxes were stacked haphazardly, some already scuffed and dusty from rough handling. "Take them," Mike ordered. His voice like chips of ice, gesturing curtly towards the pile. He addressed Greg and Chloe directly, ignoring Eleanor for the moment. Load every one of these into your car and deliver them to whatever hole Sophia has crawled into. Do it now. If they're still here in 10 minutes, they go into the recycling dumpster at the curb. Greg started to stammer. Mike, listen, we just wanted to... Mike cut him off with a glare that silenced him instantly. Save it. Your chance to talk was last night, when you were laughing at the club. You chose your side. Now live with the consequences of backing a losing horse. He watched unmoving as they exchanged panicked glances, then quickly, silently began wrestling the boxes towards their car, avoiding his eyes. He turned to Eleanor, his expression softening fractionally. She shouldn't have dragged you into this, Eleanor. Tears welled in her eyes. Michael, I am so sorry. What she did... There's no excuse. But she's my daughter. I had to come. Mike gave a curt nod. I understand maternal loyalty, but understand this. Her actions, and theirs. He jerked his head towards Greg and Chloe, awkwardly shoving a box into their trunk. Have immediate and severe consequences. She and they need to learn that lesson. Eleanor wiped a tear, looking utterly defeated. I know. I tried to warn her. Just... Please, Michael, don't let this bitterness destroy you, too. They declared war, Eleanor, Mike replied quietly, his gaze hardening again as he watched Greg and Chloe finish loading the last box. I simply intend to win it decisively. He watched them drive away, carrying the physical remnants of Sophia's life in his house, soiled and discarded. Then he turned and walked back into his reclaimed home, and the silence now feeling less like emptiness and more like clear, undisputed territory. The personal effects were purged. Next, the professional fallout for his treacherous friends. With the physical remnants of Sophia's presence purged from his house, Mike allowed himself a brief moment to survey his reclaimed territory before turning his focus outward. Greg Morrison Logistics, Chloe Vance Consulting, the friends who had laughed, clapped, and celebrated his humiliation, clients who had enjoyed the benefits of his firm's services while betraying his personal trust. It was time for the professional consequences phase of his operation. This was his arena, his expertise. He didn't need illegal access or digital intrusions for the stage. As the owner of Callahan Forensic Solutions, Mike possessed a deep understanding of corporate vulnerabilities and regulatory pressure points. He began with open-source intelligence, leveraging the same databases and analytical techniques his firm used for legitimate client investigations. State business filings, news archives, industry publications, online reviews from disgruntled former employees or clients. Even Greg and Chloe's own corporate social media posts boasting about contracts or operational efficiencies. All were data points to be collected and analyzed. He already possessed a baseline familiarity from their previous client relationship. Fragments of conversations about cash flow challenges, supplier issues, or cutting regulatory corners now are recalled with chilling clarity. He briefed Sarah Chenoweth. He get into his sharp, unflappable operations manager, a former IRS investigator Mike had recruited years ago. Project Nightingale, he instructed, keeping his tone neutral, professional. Deep background assessment internal for now. Morrison Logistics and Advanced Consulting. Financial stability indicators, regulatory compliance history, tax posture, vendor disputes, contractor agreements, standard forensic protocols, look for anomalies, deviations, red flags. Keep the research contained within our existing ethical frameworks and public data sources for now. Sarah, perceptive and discreet, simply nodded. Understood, Mike. Scope defined. I'll assign the initial data collation. The Callahan Forensic Solutions team went to work. They cross-referenced Greg's publicly available DOT safety ratings and inspection reports with industry benchmarks. They analyzed reported fleet sizes against estimated mileage inferred from logistics contracts mentioned in local business journals or press releases. They looked for liens, judgments, or lawsuits filed against either company. For Chloe's consultancy, they scrutinized her firm's structure, the language used in client testimonials, searching for patterns or puffery, public records of any professional licenses, and online chatter regarding her billing practices or contractor relationships. It didn't take long for inconsistencies to surface. Morrison Logistics showed a statistically improbable on-time delivery records given its fleet size and reported driver pool, hinting strongly at hours of service violations, likely achieved through falsified electronic logging devices, ELDs. Furthermore, their estimated fuel expenditures based on inferred mileage and average fuel costs seemed significantly lower than their reported state fuel tax payments would suggest. Chloe Vance Consulting appeared to operate with a suspiciously lean employee footprint, relying heavily on a rotating cast of 199 independent contractors for core business functions, a classic red flag for potential worker misclassification to avoid payroll taxes, insurance, and benefits. Vague but recurring mentions in online forums hinted at opaque billing and potential conflicts of interest in her vendor recommendations. Mike reviewed the preliminary findings compiled by Sarah. The anomalies were there, clear indicators of businesses cutting corners, likely breaking rules to maintain profitability or fun lifestyles. He authorized the next phase, targeted analysis. His team delved deeper, legally obtaining more specific records where possible, building models, and documenting the discrepancies with forensic precision. The analysis solidified the suspicions into actionable intelligence. They found strong evidence indicating Greg's company was likely using software overrides or manual adjustments to manipulate ELD data, creating phantom rest periods for drivers. The fuel tax discrepancies pointed towards systematic underreporting across multiple quarters. For Chloe, the pattern of contractor usage strongly suggested deliberate misclassification under state and federal labor laws. More damningly, they uncovered evidence that Chloe had recommended a specific software vendor to multiple clients without disclosing she received substantial referral commissions from that vendor. A clear ethical breach, potentially illegal depending on her client agreements. Mike examined the finalized reports, the cold, hard data confirming the vulnerabilities. He now had the ammunition. It was time to deploy it, not through direct confrontation, but through the impersonal, crushing weight of regulatory scrutiny. He personally drafted 2 separate, highly detailed, anonymous complaints, leveraging his knowledge of bureaucratic trigger points. Complaint number 1 was carefully segmented and submitted electronically, using encrypted relays to obscure its origin. One part, detailing the suspected ELD manipulation and hours of service violations, with specific examples inferred from public data, went directly to the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration's FMCSA National Whistleblower Portal. Another part, meticulously outlining the fuel tax discrepancies with supporting calculations, was filed with the Colorado Department of Revenue's Tax Fraud Division. Complaint number 2 targeted Chloe. An anonymous, comprehensive report alleging persistent worker misclassification, citing state labor codes and providing examples of contractor duties that mirrored employee functions, was submitted to the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment. Separately, using a burner email account and posing as a concerned industry observer, Mike forwarded a carefully worded email to the CEO of Chloe's largest known client. The email didn't make direct accusations, but raised pointed questions about Vance Consulting's opaque billing for strategic research hours, and subtly highlighted the potential conflict of interest regarding the software vendor Chloe had strongly advocated for, suggesting the client review their agreements and invoices carefully. Mike leaned back, initiating the transmissions. There was no overt aggression, just the quiet click of a mouse deploying carefully aimed packets of information designed to trigger systemic responses. Weeks turned into a month. Then the ripples began. Mike learned through industry contacts and monitoring public filings that Morrison Logistics had been slapped with a surprise, comprehensive FMCSA compliance review and a full-scope state fuel tax audit, demanding years' worth of records on short notice. Around the same time, Chloe Vance Consulting received formal notification of a Department of Labor investigation into its employment practices. Worse for her, her anchor client abruptly put her contract under review, demanding a detailed audit of all past billings related to the conflicted vendor recommendation. The panic from Greg and Chloe, when it came, was palpable, though indirect. Mike heard through the grapevine about Greg frantically trying to hire expensive transportation lawyers, about operational chaos as DOT investigators descended on his dispatch center. He saw Chloe posting defensively on LinkedIn about baseless regulatory overreach, while simultaneously trying to manage the fallout with her biggest client. They were caught in bureaucratic gears, facing potentially crippling fines, license suspensions, lawsuits, and reputational ruin. They might have suspected Mike was somehow involved, but the attacks came cloaked in officialdom, triggered by anonymous tips citing verifiable or likely verifiable data related to their own questionable practices. They were scrambling, isolated, and fighting shadows, unable to directly confront the architect of their professional demise. Mike watched the unfolding chaos from a distance, a grim, cold satisfaction settling in as the consequences he engineered took root. The ensuing months were a grinding crawl through the legal machinery of divorce. Discovery requests flew back and forth, depositions were taken, and Arthur Vance, Sophia's aggressive attorney, employed every tactic in his arsenal. Despite Sophia's increasingly precarious position, with Evan having likely vanished, and her own finances perhaps strained by the ongoing regulatory assaults on Greg and Chloe, indirectly impacting her network, Vance fought fiercely, primarily focusing on piercing the corporate veil of Callahan Forensic Solutions, arguing Mike was hiding substantial personal wealth behind a complex structure. The matter finally culminated in a decisive hearing before a family court judge. The sterile courtroom buzzed with low tension. Mike sat composed beside Arthur Thorne, their files meticulously organized. Across the aisle, Sophia radiated hostility, conferring intense whispers with Vance, whose confidence seemed slightly frayed around the edges. Thorne, calm and methodical, addressed the court first, tackling the division of assets head-on. "Your Honor, regarding the marital residence located in Cherry Creek," he began, his voice resonating clearly, "we present the certified deed, purchase agreement, and mortgage origination documents." He placed the exhibits before the clerk. All documentation unequivocally confirms the property was purchased solely by my client, Mr. Michael Callahan, 5 years prior to his marriage to the petitioner. It remains titled in his name alone and is, therefore, his separate premarital property, not subject to division. Vance rose to object, making a predictable argument about potential commingling of funds or marital contributions to the property's value. Thorne, anticipating this, presented detailed bank records tracing mortgage payments directly from Mike's premarital accounts and evidence that major renovations predated the marriage. The judge reviewed the documents briefly. The evidence regarding the premarital nature and titling of the property appears conclusive, ruled as respondent's separate property. Strike one. Sophia visibly stiffened. Next came the battle over Callahan Forensic Solutions. Vance launched into a passionate argument that the firm, despite its legal structure, was Mike Callahan, the product of his skill, reputation, and labor during the marriage, and thus its substantial value should be considered a marital asset. Thorne waited patiently for Vance to finish, then countered with cool precision. Your Honor, counsel's argument ignores fundamental principles of corporate law and established legal precedent. He submitted the certified copies of the irrevocable trust documents that legally owned Callahan Forensic Solutions, highlighting the date of establishment, years before the marriage. He followed with Mike's formal employment contract as managing director, specifying his duties and salary, and finally the corresponding pay stubs and W-2 forms verifying that salary. Mr. Callahan, Thorne stated plainly, is a W-2 employee of the CFS Trust, which owns the firm. While his expertise is integral to the firm's success, his legal status for purposes of marital asset division is that of an employee, not the owner of the underlying entity. This structure, common in professional practices and established for legitimate liability protection and estate planning long before this marriage, is legally sound. Vance attempted to argue it was a sham structure designed to defraud Sophia. Thorne arched an eyebrow. A bold accusation, Your Honor, particularly against a respected forensic accountant and former FBI agent, offered without a scintilla of evidence. Unless counsel has proof of fraudulent intent in the trust formation years ago, the structure stands. The judge, clearly agreeing, shut down Vance's line of argument. The business entity, as legally structured and documented, is ruled separate property. Strike two. Sophia's knuckles were white where she gripped the counsel table. Finally, the issue of spousal support. Vance, recovering slightly, argued that Sophia, despite her job, required alimony to maintain the lifestyle she had become accustomed to during the marriage. Thorne rose again, a predator sensing the kill. Your Honor, we will now address the petitioner's request for alimony and simultaneously introduce our counterclaim for spousal support taken and payable to the respondent. He formally submitted Dave Riley's sworn, notarized affidavit graphically detailing the events at the Crystal Sphere, the public adultery, witnessed by multiple individuals. The grounds for this dissolution, Your Honor, are unequivocally the petitioner's blatant and public infidelity. He then drew the judge's attention back to the financial evidence. As established, Mr. Callahan's documented income as an employee is X amount. He then presented Sophia's verified income from her marketing director position, obtained during discovery. Ms. Callahan's documented income is Y amount, demonstrably and significantly higher than Mr. Callahan's. Thorne let the comparison sink in before delivering the final blow. Therefore, Your Honor, pursuant to Colorado revised statutes, he cited the specific section governing alimony considerations, particularly fault and relative earning capacity. Given that Ms. Callahan is the party at fault for the dissolution of the marriage through documented adultery, and given the established income disparity, where the petitioner earned substantially more than the respondent, we formally request rehabilitative spousal support be awarded to Mr. Callahan, payable by Ms. Callahan. A stunned silence fell over Sophia's side of the courtroom. She stared at Thorne and then at Mike, her face contorted in disbelief and incandescent rage. She began whispering furiously to Vance, who looked utterly blindsided, fumbling through his notes. He made a weak attempt to re-argue Mike's hidden wealth, but the judge curtly reminded him that the business ownership issue had already been ruled upon based on the presented legal structure. The judge reviewed the statutes and the evidence. The ruling was swift and brutal. The court grants the dissolution of marriage on the grounds of the petitioner's adultery. The marital residence in the business entity known as Callahan Forensic Solutions are confirmed as the respondent's separate property. The petitioner's claims for a division of these assets and for spousal support are denied. The judge paused, looking directly at Sophia. Regarding the respondent's counterclaim, given the petitioner's fault in the documented income differential, the court hereby orders the petitioner, Ms. Callahan, to pay spousal support to the respondent, Mr. Callahan, in the amount of $1,500 per month for a period of 24 months. The gavel fell. Sophia looked poleaxed, trembling visibly, restrained only by Vance placing a hand on her arm. Mike allowed himself only the briefest, almost imperceptible exchange of nods with Thorne. It was done. A complete, devastating legal victory. He stood, smoothed his suit jacket, and walked out of the courtroom without a backward glance, leaving the wreckage of Sophia's avarice and betrayal behind him. Signing the final divorce decree felt less like a victory and more like closing a thick, heavy ledger filled with bad debts and fraudulent entries. The legal battle was over, won decisively on every count, but the process left Mike with a lingering sense of grim finality rather than elation. His life, meticulously ordered, had been violently disrupted, and though he had ruthlessly excised the source of the infection, the phantom limb of his marriage still occasionally ached. News of the fallout for the other players trickled in over the subsequent weeks and months, relayed through Dave Riley, occasional industry chatter, and one final weary phone call from Eleanor. Evan Prescott, Sophia's catalyst and co-conspirator, had vanished from the Denver scene almost immediately after the club confrontation. Dave confirmed through mutual acquaintances that Evan had been unceremoniously fired from his nebulous consulting gig. Sophia's boss, Mr. Davis, apparently possessed a zero-tolerance policy for employees embroiled in public, reputation-damaging scandals, especially those involving prominent figures like Mike. Eva had reportedly left Colorado entirely, seeking anonymity and likely fleeing any potential legal or financial obligations that Sophia might try to pin on him. A predictable exit for a man of weak character. The consequences for Greg Morrison and Chloe Vance were more concrete and professionally devastating, precisely as Mike had engineered. The anonymous, data-rich tips to the DOT and the Colorado Department of Revenue had triggered comprehensive, invasive audits for Morrison Logistics. Buried under mountains of paperwork requests, facing crippling fines for documented logbook fraud and fuel tax evasion, Greg's company ground to a halt. Key contracts were lost due to the operational chaos and reputational damage. Bankruptcy seemed inevitable. Chloe Vance Consulting fared no better. The Department of Labor investigation into worker misclassification resulted in substantial penalties and back pay demands. Simultaneously, the anonymous email to her anchor client had prompted a full audit of past billings, uncovering the referral fee conflict and inflated hours, leading to the immediate termination of her contract and demands for repayment. Their professional lives were in ruins, and Dave reported hearing their once close friendship had disintegrated into bitter public arguments and mutual blame. Sophia's situation, as relayed reluctantly by Eleanor, was equally bleak. The socialite and event planner found herself ostracized within the Denver circle she once navigated with ease. The public nature of the divorce, coupled with the whispers surrounding the collapse of Greg and Chloe's businesses, which many intuited was connected, even if they couldn't prove Mike's direct hand, made her toxic. She lost her marketing director position soon after the court ruling. Instability and significant reputational risk to our brand was the official reason Eleanor conveyed. Facing financial ruin, legally obligated to pay Mike's spousal support she could barely afford, and abandoned by Evan, Sophia was living in a small, nondescript rental apartment on the outskirts of the city, a precipitous fall from the Cherry Creek mansion. Mike listened to Eleanor's account politely, expressed sympathy for Eleanor's position as a concerned mother, but offered none for Sophia herself. Choices have consequences. With the external battles concluded, Mike deliberately turned his focus inward. He poured his energy into Callahan Forensic Solutions, immersing himself in complex cases, finding solace in the familiar logic of numbers and the pursuit of financial truth. The firm thrived under his intensified focus. The house, once a stage for betrayal, slowly began to feel like home again, quiet, orderly, secure. It was peaceful, but profoundly solitary. He decided it was time to act on a desire long suppressed during his marriage, getting dogs. Sophia had never been keen. Now there was nothing stopping him. After careful research, he found a reputable German Shepherd rescue organization nestled in the foothills outside Denver. He spent a Saturday there, not looking for specific traits, but waiting for a connection. It happened with 2 dogs, littermates, almost a year old. The male, powerfully built with an air of quiet confidence, immediately pushed his head into Mike's hand. The female, slightly smaller, watched him intently with intelligent, assessing eyes before deciding he was acceptable and nudging her brother aside for attention. He adopted them both, naming the male Zeus and the female Athena. Their arrival transformed the house. Early morning runs became adventures on nearby trails, the dogs bounding ahead, checking back, their presence a joyous, grounding counterpoint to his analytical thoughts. The quiet evenings were now filled with the soft sounds of contented canine sighs, the click of claws on hardwood floors, the comforting weight of a furry head resting on his knee while he read case files. Zeus was the noble protector, Athena the clever strategist. Together they were unwavering, uncomplicated loyalty. A balm to wounds he hadn't fully realized were still raw, they ensured he was never truly alone. He looked at her now, laughing as Baxter tried to steal Zeus's favorite retrieving toy. This felt real. Their connection hadn't been forged in crisis or fueled by drama, but built slowly, steadily on shared hikes, quiet evenings, mutual respect, and honest conversations. He had learned brutal lessons about trust, deception, and the fragility of appearances. And that knowledge hadn't made him permanently cynical, but rather more discerning. His internal forensic analysis was still active, but now applied with greater wisdom to the architecture of his own life and relationships. They continued their hike, the dogs weaving happily around them. Mike breathed in the clean mountain air, felt the comfortable silence settle between him and Hannah, punctuated only by birdsong and the panting of the dogs. The ghosts of Sophia, Evan, Greg, and Chloe were finally quiescent, relegated to a closed case file in the archives of his mind. That chapter was over. He started spending occasional Saturday mornings volunteering at the rescue, offering his firm's services pro bono to help streamline their financial reporting and grant applications. It was a way to give back, using his skills for something unequivocally positive. It was during one of these volunteer sessions while reviewing donor records in the small, cluttered office that he met Hannah Sterling. The shared last name with Olivia's previous associate was a strange coincidence of life, quickly noted and dismissed. Hannah was the rescue's operations manager, juggling logistics, veterinary schedules, and volunteer coordination with a calm efficiency Mike admired. She had a warm, direct manner, intelligent eyes that held a spark of humor, and a practical, compassionate approach to her work. Their initial conversations were strictly professional, focused on the rescue's financial needs. But gradually, working side by side amidst the organized chaos of barking dogs and well-meaning volunteers, they started talking about other things: the challenges of nonprofit management, the absurdity of corporate jargon they both encountered, their shared love for the rugged Colorado outdoors. Mike found himself drawn to her authenticity. There was no artifice, no calculated facade, just competence, intelligence, and a genuine kindness. He was cautious, the scars of Sophia's betrayal making him wary of misplaced trust, but Hannah's easygoing nature and sharp wit were disarming. He eventually invited her for coffee after a long volunteer shift. Coffee led to comparing notes on nearby hiking trails. Hiking together, with Zeus and Athena enthusiastically approving of Hannah and her own energetic rescue mutt, became a regular weekend occurrence. They talked for hours on those trails, surrounded by the grandeur of the Rockies. He shared a carefully edited version of his recent divorce, focusing on the breach of trust rather than the elaborate revenge. She, in turn, shared aspects of her own life, her dedication to animal welfare, her past experiences. A connection formed, built not on whirlwind romance, but on shared values, mutual respect, and the simple pleasure of honest conversation. Hannah began to occupy a quiet, positive space in his life, a gentle counter-melody to the harsh dissonance of the past year. It felt healthy, normal, a foundation perhaps for a different kind of future. A year slid by, marked by the changing Colorado seasons. Autumn painted the aspens gold, winter draped the Rockies in white, and now spring was breathing life back into the foothills west of Denver. On a clear, crisp Saturday morning, Mike found himself hiking a familiar trail, the vast blue sky stretching overhead. Beside him, Hannah matched his easy stride, while their three dogs, his loyal Zeus and Athena, and her energetic mutt Baxter, explored the path ahead with boundless enthusiasm. They paused at an overlook, the panoramic view sweeping down towards the distant Denver skyline. Baxter flopped down happily, while Zeus and Athena sat alertly at Mike's feet, leaning slightly against his legs. Hannah pointed towards a distant peak, sharing a story about a challenging climb she'd done years ago. Mike listened, watching the way the sunlight caught her hair, the genuine animation in her expression. In moments like these, the quiet contentment felt profound. He thought back occasionally, inevitably, to the maelstrom of the preceding years, the shock of Sophia's betrayal, the cold fury that fueled his response, the calculated dismantling of her life and those of Greg and Chloe. He felt no remorse for his actions. They had made their choices, crossed lines that demanded consequences. His response, utilizing the skills he possessed, had been in his analytical assessment a necessary and proportionate rebalancing of egregious wrongs. Justice, in its own harsh way, had been served. He remembered Eleanor's warning about the hollowness of such victories. Indeed, for a time after the legal battles ended and the adrenaline faded, there had been an emptiness. The destruction, however justified, left a void where 15 years of shared history, however illusory, had once existed. The quiet in the Cherry Creek house had initially felt vast and echoing, but the quiet wasn't empty now. It had gradually filled with the comforting presence of Zeus and Athena, their unwavering loyalty a stark contrast to human betrayals. it filled with the intellectual stimulation of challenging cases at Callahan Forensic Solutions, where his skills continued to uncover truth and hold wrongdoers accountable, but now solely for legitimate clients. And increasingly, it filled with the warmth, intelligence, and easy companionship of Hannah. He had faced profound betrayal and emerged not just intact, but perhaps fundamentally stronger, clearer. He hadn't merely survived, he had rebuilt, consciously choosing authenticity over illusion. The future wasn't about lingering bitterness or the diminishing returns of past victories. It was about the solid path beneath his feet, the loyal companions at his side, and the genuine connection with the woman walking beside him. Reaching over, Mike took Hannah's hand, the simple contact feeling more substantial and grounding than anything his previous life had ever offered. The path ahead, winding through the sun-dappled aspens, looked clear and inviting. He had found his peace.